For a chef, he didn't eat a lot, especially when he was at his restaurant. He ate at odd hours. His whole life consisted of odd hours. Currently, he was throwing a plate like a frisbee against the back wall of his kitchen, getting everyone in his kitchen to turn and face him.
That's what I want to do when I see the food you have prepared. Make me hungry. That is your job. Do your job.
This is the head chef, Gregory Ramon, spelled Raymond but pronounced Ramon, which gives him an ethnic flexibility that has only enhanced his reputation and cross-cultural appeal. Barely 30 years old, he has the gravitas that comes along with being one of the youngest celebrity chefs in all of New York City. He begins to walk around the kitchen, stopping and critiquing each station that he comes across by taste testing each item he sees or simply pointing at the food and asking questions. At the first station, he tries a small piece of chicken.
Raise your hands if you believe that people like to eat good food.
7 chefs and sous chefs raise their hands simultaneously.
So we agree. Why then are we making food that tastes like old people having sex?
Nobody is making eye contact with Chef Greg. Having heard his colorful yet off-color rants many times before this does not make it any easier to swallow. Pun intended.
People come here for flavor. If they wanted something bland and boring, they would have stayed at home tonight. Add seasoning. Yes, chef!
Yes, chef is the standard response from anyone whom is lucky enough to have their food savagely critiqued by Chef Gregory Ramon.
The fact that I need to tell you that tells me you are not ready to be in my kitchen. Yes, chef. What are you preparing, chef?
Chef, this is coq au vin.
Talk to me like I'm a customer who comes here for food and bragging rights.
This is a traditional French dish where chicken is braised with red wine, mushrooms, onions, and bacon. We marinate the chicken in red wine along with onions, carrots, and celery.
Now explain to me if you are trying to create the messiest station in all of New York City? This looks like Hell's Kitchen in 1974. Clean it up! Yes, chef.
What are you preparing, chef? Bouillabaisse. This is a Provençal seafood stew originating from Marseille. It typically includes a variety of fish, such as cod, sea bass, and shellfish, cooked with tomatoes, saffron, garlic, and herbs. It's served with a side of roux and crusty bread.
Too much salt. Throw it away and start over when you don't feel like poisoning someone.
Yes, chef.
I will not babysit. Either you straighten up or you will be let go. Have I made myself clear?
Everyone responds in unison with,
Yes, chef. Show your worth.
Everyone responds in unison with,
Yes, chef.
Chef Greg walks out of his large kitchen into the main dining area. It is packed tonight, as it is every night in Melusine, his restaurant specializing in French cuisine located in Tribeca. Hello, chef.
Hello, chef. Hello, chef.
Warm greetings are sent to Chef Greg from every direction. Either you knew who he was and wanted to pay your respect, or you could feel a shift in the room that let you know that someone important was approaching your airspace, and you should stand a little straighter. Chef Greg zeroes in on one table. The one table with children. 2 children. Eating with their parents. He stops and asks the father first, How is everything tonight?
Delicious,
he says. His wife agrees. Gregory puts his focus towards the children and asks them the same question.
Are you enjoying your food?
Children nod while avoiding eye contact. Standard response towards a stranger. Gregory knows the best way to create excitement for kids is to bring up their favorite topic. Dessert. Will you have room for cake after you eat that chicken? The children smile. If I come back here in 30 minutes and you say you're too full for cake, I will be very upset, and I'll tell your parents to take away all your toys. Understood? The children nod while the parents smile and giggle. Chef Greg keeps making his way around the restaurant, looking for any signs of grief. His eccentric nature and pleasure at making the rounds of his own establishment have made him a favorite amongst the elites. They come for the food, but the real main course is having a conversation with the guy that Newsweek dubbed the most interesting new flavor on the New York City menu. This was a classic mid-90s Newsweek headline. before people could be described as flavors without other people getting upset that it was somehow an insensitive way to categorize their ethnic inspirations or misappropriation. Newsweek wasn't the only major publication of the time that seemed to own a timeshare in sucking up to Chef Greg. The New York Post used to routinely report on all the celebrities of that year who would go to Melusine and give their status a little extra salt. Steve Buscemi, Ethan Hawke, Edward Norton, Philip Seymour Hoffman, John Turturro, Parker Posey, Patricia Arquette, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Gwyneth Paltrow, Sarah Polley. These were just some of the celebrities who used to frequent his establishment, mostly during off hours when it felt safe to grab a bite and maybe a bottle of something expensive without paparazzi jamming Polaroids down their throats. Nights for Chef Greg typically ended around 4 a.m. His rat race of a brain did not allow him to fall asleep any earlier than that. He found it to be complimentary when people described his work ethic as a vampire on cocaine. He liked to enjoy a glass of very expensive red wine with the staff who stayed after a long week, and then he would follow up that glass of red with a glass of something light brown. The light brown section of the night usually was a solo venture, unless one of the previously mentioned actresses were able to slide their way into his secret menu. It had only been 14 months, and already he was beginning to feel a sense of unease. He didn't want to turn into a houseplant. He wanted to stay relevant by staying ahead of the game. He wanted a new challenge. There were countless young up-and-comers who were no doubt chomping at the collective bit to take the throne as the new, hot young chef. So he began to set his sights on something more ambitious. He wanted to open up a new restaurant somewhere reclusive, somewhere that celebrity was not rewarded. He wanted to cater towards currency that was built on inclusivity and giving back. Could he be the first chef who not only dreamed of letting the poor feel rich, but made it a reality? The question was where and when. His best ideas came between 3 and 4 in the morning. It was 3:45. So why hadn't the idea hit him yet? Maybe it was Parker Posey. She was hard to ignore and seemed keen on staying the night. "You can talk to me now, but I won't stop hating you for an hour." "This can't wait that long." "Fine, but I haven't had my coffee yet, and it'll take at least an hour for the caffeine to kill the hangover. Until that happens, all I'm going to hear is how much I hate the sound of your voice." This was a par for the course conversation between Chef Greg and the manager of his restaurant, his cousin Jefferson, when they would be the first to arrive at his restaurant on a Sunday afternoon. "Let me start at the end," Jefferson said, before he slid across a business card with a number handwritten on the back of it. Chef Greg looked at it, confused, asking, "Whose number is this?" "That's not a number," Jefferson said. "That's an offer." "I think I don't hate you anymore." Jefferson finally sat down, yet his legs would not stop bouncing as Chef Greg sipped his coffee every 5 seconds. "Jacques Coeur. He comes in last night with a blonde that would make you believe in God. Orders the bouillabaisse. Never touches it. Orders a bottle of the Screaming Eagle. Never touches that either. He sits there and watches his lady enjoy her meal. I see he hasn't touched his plate. He says, 'Who can I talk to about having Chef Greg cook for me sometime?' He never touched the bouillabaisse?" "No." "That prick." "I tell him that unfortunately Chef Greg does not cater private events. His lady ever so delicately puts her hand on mine and says, 'Everybody has a price.' On top of my hand and under her hand is that card. I made some phone calls this morning. Nobody knows this guy." "So he's full of crap?" "Full of crap until I get a phone call." "From him?" "From her. She invites me to her place. Penthouse. Pierre Hotel, 795 Fifth Avenue. Guess who's there?" "Jacques." "He tells me he wants to fly you out for his birthday to cook for him and his friends, and he is willing to pay whatever it takes." "Whatever it takes?" "It gets better." "Better? How could this get better?" Jefferson puts the manila folder down into Chef Greg's hands. Chef Greg opens it up and sees the photos of 5 men. These are the men I'd be cooking for? No, Jefferson says. It's the men you'd be cooking.
You want me to cook humans?
I don't want you to cook humans. Jacques Coeur wants you to cook humans.
Ah, you actually had me going for a second. Very funny. Good name, too, for the Frenchie. Okay, back to reality. I want to start serving elk. Do we know anyone in Texas?
This is not a joke, cousin.
Chef Greg handed the folder back to Jefferson and told him, "You can't be serious."
Look at the men in this folder. Jefferson started to read off their offenses. Murderers, rapists, terrorists, child molesters, the worst of the worst. They're all getting the death penalty. All you're doing is putting their bodies to good use. You want to have enough capital to make a 3-star Michelin restaurant in South Sudan? This is how you do it.
Chef Greg waited for a smirk to appear on his cousin's face to indicate that this was in fact a joke, but that smirk never arrived. "Cousin, you have lost your mind. I think you need help."
Meet with him. Worst case scenario, you guys talk, and you have another great story to tell at your restaurant.
Chef Greg gets up and begins to pace towards the window in Jefferson's office, overlooking a bustling New York City street, as Jefferson walks up nearby to reiterate, "If it turns out to be a joke, you're dead to me, cousin." Jefferson puts out his wrists as if to say, "I surrender," before proclaiming,
I'll be as dead as those scumbags in that manila folder. Just admit to yourself that you're intrigued.
Chef Greg finally turns around and says, "We're talking in hypotheticals?"
Naturally.
"If this ever got out, I'd be ruined."
These aren't the kind of guys that let things get out.
He had never been to Death's Door before. This bothered Chef Greg for multiple reasons. One, it was a cool-ass bar. It had framed pictures all over the walls dating back to the creation of New York City. If these were any indication, this had to be one of the oldest bars in the country. The actual bar was white marble. It had this immaculate combination of feeling both timely and completely ahead of its time. Chef Greg marveled at its simplicity and elegance. How the hell had he never been here before? He had never even heard of this bar, and he had been to a lot of bars. His entire 20s and now early 30s had been spent priding himself on trying every bar he could find. Well, to be more accurate, every bar that did not have a TV. This bar was perfect. There were only 2 people in this bar. The first man was sitting by himself towards the back at a table, the only table within spitting distance of the jukebox. He seemed dejected. We locked eyes for a moment, but then he went back to staring at nothing. The other person there was the bartender, a wistful-looking man with a handlebar mustache wearing a high-collared shirt, buttoned-up wool vest, high-waisted cotton trousers with lace-up boots and a necktie. He walked up towards Chef Greg while drying a mug. "What can I get you, friend?" Chef Greg was overwhelmed by the selection. There was nothing low class here. Every potential drink was top of the line. He couldn't even decide.
Miquelon 26.
Chef Greg turned to see who had ordered that drink. It was Jacques, walking towards the bar. As he sat down, he told the bartender,
Make it 2 sol.
His accent was not quite French, not as much as his name might imply. It was heavier, gruffier, as if he had chewed up multiple continents and spit them out into something smooth. He was about 6'4". Striking was an understatement. He had this pitch-black hair, slicked back. When he moved, it was as if his feet didn't touch the ground. His Valentino suit was impeccable.
Chef Greg couldn't tell how old he was. Timeless. That was the closest approximation to an age he couldn't make in his head. Jacques thanked Chef Greg for coming and then began to speak about how much he admired his dedication, not just to his craft, but to ensuring that his customers enjoy their experience beyond the food. He had been a fan of his for some time, ever since he was a sous chef at Abyss, the sushi restaurant across the street from the World Trade Center.
I'm sure you have many questions for me. Before you start, take this as a token of faith.
It was a check for $50,000. Jacques smiled as he lit his cigarette. Chef Greg did have questions. A lot of questions. The first one was, how could this possibly be real? How could this possibly be legal? How could he have this much money to spend on something that can't possibly be real or legal? Jacques put out his cigarette when Chef Greg was done asking questions so that he could answer.
I served in my military for a long time, fighting for my country. I came across some bad men, very bad men. We had to do what needed to be done to ensure that my country and your country remained free. Sometimes I would look into a man's eyes and see evil, pure evil. And then a year or two later, I would look into the eyes of another man and see the same thing. I started to wonder if killing one man was enough. If their body dies, will their soul survive? Could we kill the soul? If so, how?
You, Chef Greg had to say it, even though he knew how twisted it was to say. Eat them?
I know what you're thinking, Chef.
Jacques lit another cigarette and then continued.
This is not the first conversation I've had where someone gave me that look you are giving me now. I sympathize with your eyes, but I will tell you that since we began this ritual of a feast, the concept of a world war has become no more. While we continue this fight, we do so on a smaller scale. So, yes, I do believe that classifying our meal is scientific. Scientific for the greater good is not only possible, but also mandatory.
Another round?
Thanks, Sal.
Chef Greg was in awe. He couldn't believe that this might actually be real, and he might actually get involved. This was the sort of adventure most people could never conceive of.
Before you say yes, Chef, I need to tell you something. There's only one rule. Just one, but you have to promise to follow this rule. Do you promise?
Yes, Chef Greg said, entranced, as Sal put down 2 fresh Macallan 26s. Jacques slightly leaned in.
You cannot feast.
Why?
Promise me that you will not feast on these men. I cannot be responsible for what happens if you did. Some men cannot contain the evil once it is inside of them. Do you promise?
Chef Greg took a swig from round 2 of the Macallan, wiped his lip, and said, I promise. Life could be worse than riding a private jet by yourself. He had been on private jets before, but he had always been with other people. And it can't be private if you were with other people, right? Well, technically this wasn't private either. There was a flight attendant. She looked just like Pamela Anderson. Her name tag actually said Pam. To this day, Chef Greg isn't completely sure that wasn't Pamela Anderson. Jacques certainly could have afforded it, right? The check for $50,000 had gone through. And all Chef Greg had to do was to drink 2 of the best scotches in his entire life. She smiled a lot. She leaned over a lot, no doubt, by accident, considering her revealing blouse and high skirt. The flight to the Faroe Islands in Denmark's approximately 10 hours. That seemed fast to Chef Greg, but he had a cocktail in Pamela Anderson, so why rush it? Every time he stared out the window, he couldn't believe he was actually doing this. His fear of being found out was outweighed by his fear of passing this up. There was also a little thing called $1 million for one night's work. Not bad for a poor kid from Newark, New Jersey. It was the first time he ever wished a flight took longer. Pam laughed at all his jokes. She even had a cocktail with him halfway through. There was a VHS player on board the plane so he could watch the show Frasier for hours. Chef Greg was one of the few people who thought Frasier was better than Seinfeld. It was an argument he loved to have because nobody in New York agreed with him. Pam told Chef Greg that they were about to touch down in the Faroe Islands. She asked if he could have his number. "You can have whatever you want," he said. She laughed, even though the moment he sobered up, he regretted that line immensely. What a creep, he thought. Just give her your number. Don't add the corny line. Idiot. He blamed the multiple cocktails. And Frasier. It felt like something David Hyde Pierce would have said. He got off the private jet and was greeted immediately by his driver. He took Chef Greg's one light bag and then opened the back door to a black luxury vehicle decked out to the nines. From there, they made their way to the resort. Accessible only by a narrow winding road that meanders through mist-shrouded mountains and lush green valleys, this hidden gem offers a retreat from the hustle and bustle of modern life. The resort itself is a harmonious blend of traditional Faroese architecture and contemporary design, with buildings crafted from local stone and timber that blend seamlessly into the surrounding landscape. Each room and suite is thoughtfully appointed, offering panoramic views of dramatic cliffs plunging into the North Atlantic Ocean. Hiking trails lead from the resort's doorstep to remote waterfalls cascading down sheer cliffs where seabirds wheel overhead, and the only sounds are the rush of water and the cry of the wind. For those seeking relaxation, the resort's spa beckons with treatments inspired by the healing powers of the sea and local herbs. A heated infinity pool seems to merge with the ocean horizon, offering a place to soak away cares while watching the ever-changing play of light over the water. Evenings are spent gathered around a crackling fire in the cozy lounge, savoring locally sourced cuisine that highlights the bounty of the islands. Fresh seafood, foraged herbs, and lamb raised on wind-swept pastures feature prominently, accompanied by fine wines and craft beers brewed in nearby villages. As night falls, the resort's remote location ensures an unparalleled view of the starlit sky, free from light pollution. Guests often find themselves spellbound by the dance of the northern lights, which frequently illuminate the heavens in a breathtaking display of color and motion. Everything about this place felt timeless. As beautiful as it was, Chef Greg knew that soon it would be time to cook. Not a bad place to die. Or cook dead people, Chef Greg thought. His room was something you couldn't even create in a video game. He could jump from his bedroom window into the ocean. He had a full massaging recliner. One of his walls was a TV. The whole wall was a TV. The bathroom was almost the size of his New York City apartment. He lay down on his floor and stared up at the ceiling, which was made of white marble. A note slid under the door. Your staff will arrive no later than 1 o'clock. If you're wondering how exactly Chef Greg planned to cook people, don't worry. Chef Greg was kind of wondering that too. He had recently become interested in cooking elk after a late-night conversation with a world champion bow hunter told him that elk was the best meat he ever ate. Chef Greg became briefly obsessed with how to cook an elk, so he assumed the same approach could be applied to humans. Hanging outside of his walk-in closet was his uniform. It was so shiny it was almost invisible. He touched it, the fabric. It was so silky smooth, yet somehow light. He put it on and couldn't help but to strut to the door. The jacuzzi inside his bathroom would have to wait until later. It was time to meet his staff. Time to see the bodies. 2 security guards lifted up the sheets of the bodies to show Chef Greg, as if he was going to approve or deny their viability to be cooked. All he could do was nod. The security guards nodded back and then proceeded to wheel them from the meat locker to the kitchen. Chef Greg walked into the kitchen and saw his staff standing there, waiting for instructions as the white sheets were taken off the bodies of the 5 dead men. Chef Greg broke the silence by asking his staff, "Is today a great day?" "Yes, Chef!" The kitchen staff stood at attention, 5 members on each side. Their ages ranged from 18 to 60. Their ethnicities stretched across the world. Clearly, they had done their due diligence to find the proper assistants for this feast. They all stood straight up. You could eat off the floor. It was whiter than Pam Anderson's teeth. On both sides of the kitchen were 4 individual ovens. Each one was the size of a Buick. Spacious enough for multiple bodies. Yes, these were the actual thoughts in Chef Greg's mind. He started to outline his plan to the staff. "The first 2 bodies will be grilled." "Yes, Chef!" "Preheat the grill on high heat. Brush the body with oil and season generously with salt, pepper, and herbs. Grill the bodies for 3 to 4 minutes per side for medium rare. Let the meat rest for a few minutes before slicing." "Yes, Chef!" "Bodies 3 and 4 will be roasted." "Yes, Chef!" "Preheat the oven to 325. Rub the bodies with olive oil and season generously with salt, pepper, and my herbs. Place the bodies in the roasting pan and roast in the oven until an internal temperature of 130 to 140. For medium rare, about 20 to 25 minutes per pound. Remove the oven and let it rest for 10 to 15 minutes before slicing thinly against the grain." "Yes, Chef!" "The 5th body will be braised. Heat oil in heavy bottom pot over medium-high heat. Sear the body in batches until browned on all sides. Set aside. Add onions, carrots, and celery to the pot and cook until softened. Deglaze the pot with red wine, scraping up any of the brown bits from the bottom. Return the body to the pot, add enough broth to cover, and season with herbs, salt, and pepper. Bring to a boil, then reduce the heat to low and simmer for 2 to 3 hours, or until the meat is tender. Serve hot, garnished with fresh herbs. Does everyone want to make a great meal today?" "Yes, Chef!" "Then let us begin." The staff was sensational. They moved with such precision and calm. Chef Greg had never seen such a smooth kitchen before. Every single staff member retained a laser focus throughout the entire course of the meal preparation. Had they done this before? If so, how many times? Surely this was not their first time, Chef Greg thought. Would he be able to pry any of them for employment back home? Would he ever see these people again? He didn't know any of their names. Did they even know his? It was the most efficient kitchen he had ever run. The most shocking thing about the whole experience was how unshocking it was. It felt rudimentary. These men were dead, and now they were being cooked. Chef Greg had cooked many animals in his life who were much more noble and deserved to have their bodies eaten way less than these monsters of men. But would they taste good? Did that even matter? It did to him. The staff began to slice chunks of meat off of the men, seasoning them to perfection, and then perfectly curating the amount of each man onto different plates corresponding to the label assigned for cooking, whether it be grilled, roasted, or braised. It was time to serve. Chef Greg stepped out of the kitchen into the dining room. It was the size of a banquet hall. Every piece of silverware and dinnerware was pristine. The staff succinctly populated the dining table with all the proper instruments while simultaneously calculating the exact distance between each item so each member at the table did not feel cramped or mistreated. A bell was rung by the security guards. 10 seconds later, men walked out from the back room. There was about 7 or 8 of them, all dressed in their high-end suits, including Jacques, who came out last. They sat around a table mid-conversation and got comfortable. Jacques tapped his glass.
I would first like to thank the tremendously talented Chef Gregory Ramon. He came a long way to be here today, and we cannot thank him enough for preparing such a delicious meal. To Chef Gregory Ramon.
They all raised their glasses as Chef Greg bowed. Jacques ended the toast by simply saying,
Let us eat.
Their plates looked normal. Everything about this meal was normal. The men began to eat, slow at first, but then quicker. Soon it became almost rapturous. They were devouring the meats on their plates before raising their hands to have their plates refilled. The more they ate, the hungrier they became. One staff member after another had to go back and forth from the kitchen to the dining room table to retrieve more human flesh. Legs, arms, hands, back, butt. Chef Greg had done his part. He kept waiting for something to happen, something extraordinary. But it already had. Him being there, participating, that was the extraordinary event. Watching men eat men. He left the dining room and went to the kitchen. He had to know. There was a pot towards the front of the kitchen. It was the braised man, his calf. It was right there. How could he not, he thought. Cooking was one thing, but tasting? How could a chef not taste? That's part of what makes him a chef. The biggest part, one could argue. Chef Greg found an empty plate nearby and scooped up a hunk of this villainous calf muscle. He sliced into it with a knife that was so strong it felt like he was slicing warm butter. He laid it out flat onto his side and stared down at it. He remembers the warning, the one rule, the only rule. But he had gotten this far because he had always broken the rules. It's what made him a great chef. Being different, being adventurous, finding all the flavor in life. And with that, he took a bite. Not bad. Pamela Anderson was replaced by Jenny McCarthy. Her name tag actually said Jenny. She wasn't as bubbly as Pam, but she made up for it by giving Chef Greg a back massage. He watched a couple episodes of Frasier, but then turned it off. The humor wasn't quite hitting him the same way it had before. Maybe Seinfeld was better. The flight seemed to drag. The ocean didn't feel as blue. His in-flight cocktail didn't have as much kick. The back massage could have used a little more elbow. Chef Greg was $1 million richer, yet he felt lighter. He couldn't pinpoint what it was exactly. Maybe it would never get more wild than this. How could he top it? Cooking murderers for what he was pretty sure was the Illuminati? I mean, where do you go from here? In his case, New York City. Tell me you ate one of the terrorists. Jefferson was fiending with questions. He wanted to know everything. Chef Greg explained that it kind of just felt like a corporate gig, the kind they used to do in their late teens and early 20s when they were just getting started with their brand. They colored within the lines and gave the people what they wanted. But it was people. Jefferson wanted more. He wanted so much more. Chef Greg couldn't give it to him. His first night back at the restaurant, he felt himself going through the motions, much more so than he normally did. He asked his head sous chef, Carmine, to take over.
Yes, chef.
Chef Greg took off his bright white chef's coat and walked out of the kitchen to go have a cigarette in the alley just behind the back entrance. He leaned against the wall and let the smoke fill his lungs, hoping it would replace his malaise. He heard a commotion nearby and turned. He saw a man being a little rough with a younger woman. There was no doubt in Chef Greg's mind that this was a pimp and a prostitute. Their clothes made it obvious. She seemed scared. He seemed scary. Normally, Chef Greg might have just turned a blind eye. You could go blind in one eye if you tried to intervene in this kind of scene. But he was feeling different today. Homeboy! They both turned as Chef Greg began walking over towards them. My girl would prefer you let her be. The pimp laughed.
Your girl, huh?
That's right. That's my woman you're being handsy with. The pimp let go of the girl and got close to Chef Greg.
You real pretty boy. Maybe I'll just do to you what I was gonna do to her. How's that sound?
That, Chef Greg said, sounds delicious. The pimp barely even felt the knife slide through his heart. Chef Greg kept his right hand on the pimp's left shoulder to keep him steady as he drove the knife deeper and then higher, while the air left the pimp's body and the light escaped from his eyes. Chef Greg let go, and the pimp fell flat on his face, his nose exploding on impact. Chef Greg turned to look up at the girl, who he could now tell was no older than 16. She stood there, silent. You should go, Chef Greg told her. She did. She ran as fast as she could in her high heels. Chef Greg bent down towards the dead pimp and turned him over, staring coldly into his eyes. It was at this exact moment that he realized.
I'm starving.